Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening from wherever you're zooming in right now. Maybe I think everyone is muted right now. Thank you very much. So before I say too many words, I actually want to hand over the stage directly to Michael Greve, the founder of Forever Healthy, because he's taking over the welcoming remarks.
Okay. Did you switch me live?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Great to see so many familiar faces. For those who are new to Forever Healthy and what we're doing, I have a super short presentation just outlining what Forever Healthy is all about and what our main initiatives are. And then I'm going to hand back to Isabelle. So let me start screen sharing. There we go. So there we go. So Forever Healthy is a private non-profit initiative. It's founded by myself and run by our management team here at Forever Healthy. Our mission is to enable people in general to vastly extend their healthy lifespan. So to give you an idea, what we are working for is, let's imagine we could immediately improve our well-being, directly reverse chronic diseases. That's the most picture that I always have in mind. I want to be as healthy at the age of 70 as I was at 30, both physically and mentally. Imagine we could stay free of the diseases of aging for most time of our life, and imagine we could extend a healthy lifespan by decades. So most amazingly, this is starting to happen. There's a still silent revolution going on. If you're not really into this field, it might sound like science fiction, but it is not. Actually, the world has started the transition from a place where we were totally helpless about age-related diseases into a world without age-related diseases and where aging is under full medical control. Of course, we are not there yet, but the theoretical groundwork has been done. Research is accelerating. Of course, there could be more, but we already seen their first promising results. Drugs and therapies that go for the root causes of aging and age-related diseases are already under development, and the first generations of rejuvenation therapies are already available today if you know where to look and what to do. So in general, for those who are really into the field, it's not the question of if anymore, but rather when this is going to happen. And this is exactly where we see our mission. We want to accelerate this when. We want to make this happen as soon as possible. Yep. So basically, we have a twofold approach at Forever Healthy. One is we want to maximize what we can do today, and we want to accelerate the future. So in terms of making use of today, we have three main initiatives. The first one is called Rejuvenation Now. And here we seek to continuously identify potential rejuvenation therapies that are already existing and systematically evaluate them on risk, benefits, and potential application. Our second major initiative is Maximizing Health. And here we want to harness the enormous wealth of the world's cutting edge medical information that's already there today to empower people to make informed decisions about their health and well-being. And our third initiative in that area, we call that Longevity Strategy. It basically combines the results of Rejuvenation Now and Maximizing Health, and it combines it with the latest knowledge of selected experts to create a step-by-step guide on how to maximize health, well-being, and longevity right now. On the other hand, we want to accelerate the future. We want to bring this time when the age-related diseases are a thing of the dark past closer. So we have three initiatives here as well. The first of all, some of you might know that it's the Undoing Aging Conference in Berlin. It's our annual conference, and we bring together both the leading researchers in the field and startups who work on therapies for human use. Unfortunately, this year we couldn't have it for obvious reasons. We hope to have the conference in person next year again. Then we fund research projects. Up to $1 million per year we spend on funding research projects in that area. And we also support the creation of startups by both mentoring and financing startups in this field that actually work on therapies for human use. So that's a super brief overview. You find more on our website on foreverhealthy.org. And so back to Isabelle.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this great welcoming remarks and the introduction for Forever Healthy. And now I would like to introduce our guest speaker and officially open our meetup for today. I'm really happy now to introduce Dr. Joris Deelen. We're going to talk about longevity genes, and Joris is a group leader at the Max Planck Institute for Biology of Aging in Cologne here in Germany. And I'm really excited because he's an expert in studying large population of humans to identify biomarkers and variants that are associated with longevities, all with a big question, which I read on your website: why do some people age more healthily than others? And with that, I would like to give the stage to you, and you may share your screen now, Joris.
Good. Thanks a lot, Isabelle, for the nice introduction, and I look forward to the talk. So, there we go. So first of all, like most of you in the audience probably know, there's a massive increase in human life expectancy during the last 200 years. So these are survival curves for men and women in the Dutch population for different generations. So in the 1850s, people lived like this. So the median age was about 50 and the maximum age about 90. It increased already quite a lot in the 1900s, and now in the 1950s even more. And what you can see is it mostly increases in the median lifespan, not so much in the maximum lifespan. And what you can also see not so clearly is that but women live always longer than men. So we know that this is largely due to environmental factors, but part of it is also genetics. So first I want to explain a bit of terminology that I will use throughout the presentation. So first, when I talk about lifespan, I talk about the number of years a person has lived. So if you are here, then your lifespan is 60 years. If you're here, your lifespan is 80 years. If I talk about longevity, I talk about survival to an exceptional old age. So we define, for example, longevity as living to an age above 90 years of age. Another criteria that you can use, take the 1% longest lived of a specific population. And as you can see here, if you would take the 1%, then in the 1850s, it would probably be 80 years, while in the 1950s, it would be 90 years. So these are the terms that I will use throughout the presentation. And like I said, the majority of your lifespan is determined by your environment, but part of it is genetics. And early studies on the genetic component of lifespan have shown that it's probably around 25%. So for this, they used twin studies. I will not go into the details, but they used mono and dizygotic twins to estimate that around 25% of your lifespan is genetically determined. However, there are more recent studies that use, instead of twins, large pedigrees, and they show that it's actually probably even lower. It's around 10 to 12%, and it may even be inflated to a so-called assortative mating, which means if you are a long-lived individual, you are it happens more often that you marry somebody that's also having, is also long-lived. So it's an overestimation, actually, this 12% likely. So if we then switch to longevity, it's a bit different. There we actually do not know how large the component is exactly, but what we do know is that if you take the 10% longest lived people of their birth cohort, then it's a heritable trait. So what you see is these people that are belonging to the 10% longest lived, they pass on their genes to the next generation. If you go to 20% or 30%, it's not happening. So really you should look at the oldest old to see this genetic component. And then there are several ways in which we can study this genetic component. we do that with so-called genome-wide association studies. So if we have a binary phenotype, so case control, like longevity, it works like the following way. So you have several people, you have males and females in the different, so the males are rounds and the females are these squares. And then you look how frequent your mutation is or your genetic variant in your controls. And you can see the variant can be there in a heterozygote state, so you only carry one copy or you carry two copies. And then you compare this frequency in your controls with that frequency in your cases. And you hope to see that your variant is increased, has an increased frequency in your cases in comparison to your controls. It can also be the other way around, but this would be considered a longevity gene, while the other way around would actually be more kind of a disease gene that might actually be depleted in frequency in long-lived people. And if you look at the continuous phenotype like lifespan, it works a bit differently. So then you have people going from young to old, and you would actually like to see if the frequency of the variant increases with age. So we did a lot of these GWASs, and these are the last two big ones where we studied longevity. And this is the result that you normally get. So I will explain the graphs. So here on the x-axis, you have all the chromosomes in your genome, and each dot, and these are a lot of dots, these are a couple of million dots, represent one genetic variant in the genome. And then here we give the so-called -10 log p-value. So how likely it is that the genetic variant is associated with your trait of interest, in our case, longevity. And we then take a cutoff at this 5 × 10⁻⁸, so a really low p-value, and consider variants that are above this threshold to be genome-wide significant and hence associated with your trait of interest. So one really clear thing that we see is that we always find ApoE. So ApoE is really strong, and we truncated the axis here because it's actually something like 10⁻⁵. And the same here with another GWAS for the same trait. So this is something that we always find. However, we do not find so many other things, at least when we look at longevity. So we seem to be stuck with ApoE there because we reached kind of the maximum of cases that we can study, which in our latest one was 11,000. There are not so many more long-lived people that we can study. And then we always find ApoE, like I said. So how does it look if you zoom in on that locus? So if you kind of zoom in on this part, we actually see that there's one really strongly associated variant, which is this variant, which is the ApoE4 allele. And I think Isabelle will talk more about that as well. And then here, there's another variant, which is resulting in the ApoE2 variant, which is independently associated. So normally, if you take this variant and you do another GWAS controlling for this variant, all these variants in between disappear. They are no longer significant, but this one remains. So it's an independent effect. So in this locus, it's determined by both ApoE4 and ApoE2. So when we zoom in on the studies, specifically that we took in our latest effort, then we can see the association of ApoE4 with longevity. So here you have a value below 1, which means that you have a decreased chance of becoming long-lived. On the other hand, if it would be above 1, it would be an increased chance of becoming long-lived. So carriers of the ApoE4 allele have a decreased probability of becoming long-lived. However, if you look at the ApoE2 allele, it's actually protective in the sense that an increased frequency is associated with increased longevity. And we see that our cases, most of the studies, it significantly increased in frequency in the long-lived people. So how is the frequency of ApoE actually in the world? So there are 3 variants of ApoE. So I talked about ApoE2, ApoE4, and the normal variant, which is the majority of the people carry them, is actually ApoE3. So you can see the frequency largely differs between the region where you are. So in Europe, it's kind of the same, but for example, here ApoE3 is really enriched in these specific countries, while ApoE2 is, it seems it's enriched here in this region in Africa. Some ApoE4 alleles are also enriched there, but you have to be aware that the studies we used are mostly based on Europeans. And if we look in Europe, actually it's not visible in this picture, but there's also kind of a north to south axis. So it seems that people in the south carry less of ApoE4 and a little bit more of ApoE2. So they seem to be doing better genetically when it comes to ApoE. What is also important to realize is that the effect of ApoE2 might differ in different ethnicities because of the frequency in those ethnicities. So the effect of ApoE2 in the African population might not be so beneficial as it is in the European population. So what do we know already about ApoE? Well, what we know, because it has been studied for a long time, is that ApoE4 carriers have an increased risk of developing several diseases like Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes. So it seems that these long-lived people probably carry less ApoE4, although some of them still carry it. You should be aware of that. And because they have less of these diseases. On the other hand, ApoE2 shows the opposite. So if you carry ApoE2, you are protective against all these diseases. And the differences between the two, ApoE4 and ApoE2, might be due to differences in how these specific genetic variants influence the structure of the protein so that it cannot fully function as it normally should. But okay, we were stuck with ApoE and we thought, okay, what can we do next? So how can we identify actually more genetic variants associated with healthy aging and with longevity? So there have been already some GWASs on other lifespan related phenotypes like parental lifespan, so how long your parents have lived, and health span, so how long it takes you to develop a first chronic disease, for example, cancer, type 2 diabetes, or cardiovascular disease. And as you can see here, there are many more loci or genetic variants that are associated with these traits. However, when we zoom in on these and we check, okay, what do they do with longevity? Most of them do not really associate with longevity. So we thought, okay, can we use these different traits to kind of increase the sample sizes of our longevity GWAS? So I joined forces with two people in Edinburgh, which actually worked a lot of parental lifespan, Paul Timmers and Peter Joshi, to combine these different phenotypes. And the first thing we did is check, okay, how genetically correlated are these phenotypes? So if you look at the overall genetic structure, how much are they overlapping? And when you do that, you actually see that lifespan and longevity are showing a value of 0.8, which is quite high. The maximum is 1, the minimum is 0, and the genetic correlation is 0.8 between the two traits. The correlation between health span and longevity is a bit lower, only 0.5, and then between health span and lifespan, it's again a bit bigger. So, and why we think that is the case, that these are genetically correlated, is because they are also correlated with the genetics of specific diseases. For example, all these three traits show a correlation with coronary artery disease and with stroke, and also with type 2 diabetes. So that is probably the reason that they are genetically so well correlated. And it also means, and that was interesting for us, that we could actually combine them. So that was our next step. So we combined the data of the three traits and did another genetic association study. And when we do that, we get this massive amount of loci. And here, these two are again truncated. So if you look at the axis, it's only to 10 to the minus 30, but they are even way more significant. The interesting thing that we saw was actually that there were 10 loci, which are highlighted here, that were associated with all three traits. So with health span, with lifespan, and with longevity separately, and as you combine them as well. And then there were 5 of these that we have never seen before, which were these 5 which are highlighted here. So that was quite interesting to us. So then we checked, okay, with what kind of other traits do these genetic variants that we identify associate? And we found that they actually associate with cardiovascular disease and with metabolic phenotypes, but also with things like smoking and immune-related parameters. And you see most of the loci actually go with cardiovascular disease, which is not a surprise, given that we know that all these traits also show a high genetic correlation with this. If we then look at what kind of genes are likely influenced by this loci, we get this list of genes. So probably these 10 loci influence all these different genes in a way. And one interesting thing that we identified is that there was this group of genes over here, which we know are increasing in expression with age, while actually our genetic variant decreases the expression with age. So it could explain why these people live longer, because they actually, this genetic variant decreases this genes, which normally would increase with age. So these people are then kind of protected against this increase. Another thing that we saw is that we identified several interesting genes that are also found in candidate gene studies in model organisms, such as FOXO, the IGF-1 receptor, and this SNCA2. So it also shows that the genetic work in humans kind of sometimes matches also what has been done and found in animal models. And the last thing that we did was actually, if we take all these genes that are over here and do a so-called enrichment analysis, so see what kind of processes they influence, we find that they influence to a very strong extent heme metabolism, so iron metabolism in your body. This is mostly caused by the genes that are in this LDLR locus, but also some genes in the FOXO locus play a role in that. And this was really something that we didn't expect and was quite new. We also used some other techniques to verify it. So we actually found that this iron metabolism is potentially causally involved in living longer. So in conclusion, it seems that by combining the different large studies of the different phenotypes, we can actually increase the sample size of the longevity studies and identify new loci or new genetic variants that are involved in longevity. So we identified now several novel longevity genes and pathways, and the next step is to further test these in model organisms and cell models to see how they work functionally. And of course, I didn't do the work alone. The last paper in which we combined the phenotype was done with, like I said, Paul Timmers, Peter Yoshi, and also James Wilson. And for all the other GWASs that we have done before, there were many people involved. This is only a subset, but these are the people that did most of the work for that. And that was it.
Yes, thank you very much. I like that you also have the different approach. You first find something in humans and then you go back to model organisms, which is usually the other way around.
Yes.
That's really, really exciting. And I like that you introduced ApoE4 and we heard so much about it, because now I'm going to share my screen, and the question and answer session we do after the next talk. You can see my screen now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, thank you very much for the talk, for introducing ApoE4. I'm introducing myself quite quickly. I'm Isabelle, and I have a PhD in genetics of aging, actually at the same institute where Joris is working. I'm the scientific spokesperson of Forever Healthy Foundation, and I'm gonna show you now with my introduction a slide that you know from Mike's presentation earlier, but I just wanted to emphasize again that we, on the one hand, accelerate the research by funding and mentoring startups in our Undoing Aging conference, but we are also really focusing on what do we have today that we can make use of to stay as healthy as long as possible. And yeah, Mike introduced them much more nicely, so quickly we're going to say Rejuvenation Now initiative is reviewing the latest advances in the field. You can find our latest publication on Senolytics, for example, on our website. The publication that I will review today for you in this presentation is from the Maximizing Health Initiative, and together we are trying to make a longevity strategy, which is a very holistic strategy that shall enable people to fastly extend their healthy lifespan. And why do we do that? So we heard from Joris quite nicely how exciting research can be, and what new markers are found. And I know that Joris is really good in communicating those findings, but mostly these findings will be published in journals which are behind paywalls and not really accessible. So what we are doing at Forever Healthy is we're making this knowledge accessible for everyone. And with that, I'm gonna dive into our newest practical guide on ApoE4, coming now from a different angle. So we now heard a lot already, but what does that mean for you if you have ApoE4? How can you what kind of risks you might experience, and what's the risk management. Our approach is that we screen the related scientific papers on that topic, we extract the relevant knowledge, and then we transform it into something actionable that you can use in your daily life. And we publish it open access, so not behind paywalls, on our knowledge base. ApoE4, we heard it so many times, but why should you care? And I know that this is a very simplified slide, because you know that you get one copy of a gene from your mom and one copy of a gene from your dad. So there could be many different constellations. You could have one copy ApoE3, one copy ApoE4, and we already saw, Joris introduced it quite nicely, the distribution. But we call ApoE2 the good variant because it's associated with longevity. The neutral variant, which most of us will actually carry, is the ApoE3. But if you look at the percentage of people having the bad variant ApoE4, which is around 25% in some populations, especially as we heard in North Europe, Germany, for example. So it's around up to 25%. So this is why you should care, because it's not a rare variant. Before we now talk about the risks, I quickly want to take a detour with you in the biology, because it makes it much easier to understand than the risks that are associated. And this is, what does ApoE do? It's a key player in lipid metabolism, and we know lipids are essential for life. All our cells, all the membranes are made out of lipids. They're very important signaling molecules, and you probably already heard on your doctor's appointment, LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol, which are circulating in this blood vein that I tried to draw here. And then what ApoE does, it transports this lipids and cholesterol, and it helps cells to take it up. And we have now depicted the ApoE3 variant, which is binding, for example, very efficiently LDL cholesterol and other lipids, and bringing it into the cells, whereas ApoE4, and Joris mentioned that before, has a quite different function. It binds different lipids and bringing it into the cell. So what you're getting with having different variants of this ApoE is that you have a different lipid metabolism in your blood and in your tissues. And now, when we talk about the risks now, we already heard the adverse effect on longevity. So ApoE4 is negatively associated with longevity. But now also we heard that from Joris already, that it's associated with an increase in cardiovascular diseases, Alzheimer's disease. ApoE is mostly expressed in the brain and in the liver, and there it also has important function in tissue repair, in inflammatory responses. And as ApoE4 works a bit differently than the other forms, you might also encounter increase in neurodegeneration. Those are just the top diseases, but also underlying, you can read more into detail in our publication, is that it's also a disbalance in glucose metabolism or insulin. Okay, and I stop here now because this sounds now a bit horrifying maybe, but I want to emphasize something. Genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. So there are many things that you can do, even if you carry the ApoE a variant, to stay healthy and to not run into the risks associated with it. So because of time limits, I took the 4 main points of our analysis, but as I said, you can still read it up on our website. Going back to the biology, there is a really strong association in taking in saturated fat via your nutrition, ApoE4, and elevated LDL cholesterol. So if you decrease your saturated fat intake, that's already shown in studies to have a big effect on reducing the risks. At the same time, you can increase the monounsaturated fatty acids, so more the plant fats in avocado, for example, or olive oil. And also studies are showing that if you also consume more low GI carbohydrates, so the carbohydrates that do not really trigger your insulin, like lentils or sweet potatoes, that also actually has a positive effect on your lipid metabolism. exercise modestly, you might get a hint of those are the things that you also actually should be doing to stay healthy. But especially for ApoE4 carriers, those are very, very efficient and effective strategies. And studies have shown that you don't need to be a marathon runner, but if you do exercise or a brisk walk 30 minutes 3 times a week, it's already, it helps a lot. You should also monitor levels of heavy metal, as ApoE, and I didn't have the time to go into detail, is also involved in heavy metal detox. And if you're wondering now if you should consider getting your ApoE status checked, there are different services that are doing that. Definitely, if you might have high cholesterol levels, or if you're considering having a keto or paleo diet, those are associated with health benefits, but not if you're ApoE4 carrier. And with this, I want to say that we are still growing our team. So if you are a PhD or a medical doctor and you're excited about rejuvenation and in reviewing the latest scientific advances and want to help us write this practical guides and the risk and benefit analysis, then join our team. And you can view all our publications and everything that we do. You can read about it in detail on our website. Thank you very much for listening.